As I said, this is to talk about Chrome status. I'll be presenting a preview of our 2021 roadmap for the Chrome status tool. I'm Jason Robbins, and I'm a longtime Googler and basically a Chrome tools person. My career focus has basically been on usability of collaborative development productivity tools. You may remember me from such past hit productivity tools as Polygarret and Monorail, otherwise known as CRBug. And before that, I worked on Google Code. But now I'm popping up a few levels from those tools that developers use day to day to instead work on Chrome Status, which is a more strategic tool. So what is Chrome Status? It started off as basically a database of features that are part of the web platform. Each one of those feature entries has the feature name, summary, and a motivation that describes why it's needed. Then there's a bunch of links that go out to technical documentation, for instance, the specification of that feature. And we track the status of the implementation of that feature in Chrome. For instance, what milestone it was targeted to ship out as part of. If we get any signals from other browser vendors about whether they intend to implement the same feature, then we also track that information. The tool has been around quite a while and it is open source, but it hasn't had dedicated engineering support until this year. Chrome Status has made a lot of progress from its database origins. Before we get to the 2021 roadmap, I just wanted to briefly highlight some of the progress that we've made in 2020. We started off by improving the project health by adding tests, updating libraries, and changing our front-end technology. We also replaced push notifications with emails because that's more useful for our users. Chris Wilson led an effort to update the documentation and our process for launching features. And so we have a new guide user experience in the Chrome Status tool that better fits that process and helps educate users about that process and where they stand in it. We refreshed the visual appearance of the site, and we fixed scalability problems on the metrics pages and throughout the site. We've also started some work on a long overdue Python update, including a bunch of libraries because of our use of the App Engine libraries. I'm going to show you on the next slides the visual refresh and what that guide UX looks like. Chrome Status's old visual style was fairly dated looking because of its use of gradients, and it had a quirky page layout. For instance, the login, logout button was way at the bottom of the page, even under the legal copyright statement. It had an over-reliance on color coding and little bits of color here and there that were unexplained, and it had floating elements on the page that sometimes obscured other page elements. The visual refresh that you see on the site live now has a cleaner look that's more aligned with the material design spec. It has higher contrast for improved readability and a more conventional page layout and set of clickable affordances. It was important to me to get this out to just make the site look like it was getting the attention that it deserved, that it had been updated, and that we cared about the usability of the site. Chrome Status's old feature editing user experience was basically a form with a very long list of fields. You can see from the scroll bar in this screenshot how long that list of fields was. There was an attempt to try to manage the complexity of that by having some fields shown or hidden based on the state of the feature, but that wasn't communicated to users, so it probably seemed pretty mysterious if they even knew that it was happening at all. But the bigger problem was that this is a tool to help a user follow a process, and so they have to look at the process for reference to see which parts of this form they're supposed to fill out at certain times. But the process and the tool were not aligned with each other. Chrome Status's guide UX attempts to make that alignment. So it takes the process document and it translates it fairly directly into the tool. So the editing experience main menu consists of a bunch of stages that show the progress that your feature should be making through that process, and it gives you progress indicators as you go. And then it highlights the current stage that you're on and the next stage that you would start after that. clicking through one of these stages brings you to a much smaller, more focused editing form for just the fields that are relevant to that stage. In 2020, we went from a passive database to basically a checklist-oriented tool that guides feature developers through the steps that they need to follow to get to a launch. In 2021, we want to broaden out from that core set of use cases, broaden out the set of users we have in mind. There's other people and other user agents that are driving parts of the web platform. We want a complete picture of everything that's happening, and we want to treat them on a more equal footing. And we also want to involve more stakeholders that are cross-functional, people with different concerns and use cases, both inside of Google and outside. And we want to become more of a feature tracking tool, not just a passive database, but that sits there, but maybe one that actually drives coordination, that sends you an email to tell you what you need to do when you need to do it. We want to go from just getting from the early explainer up to the feature launch and consider the whole feature lifecycle, including more support. We want to evolve from the notion of browser signals to a more full participation by other user agents that we can that informs all of our decision making. And we want to go from a database of links to a integration tool that brings information from these backends into one unified view. To support the full feature lifecycle, we should have a map of what that lifecycle is. So here I've outlined what we think of as the feature lifecycle. And a lot of this comes from our launch process. We have kind of a skeleton of what these steps are and what some of the things that need to get done are. But we want to expand out to put more emphasis on the early stages of gathering requirements and prioritizing them against each other, and bringing in more stakeholders to do that, all the way down through shipping the feature, and then the go-to-market aspect of publicizing a feature through announcements and developer documentation, and supporting that feature by relating its metrics to the feature record, for instance, and helping users more easily find and file bugs. Since this is an outline, we can use it to identify some gaps in our functionality, and we have some ideas about how to fill in some of those gaps that I'll show you when we get to the roadmap part of the talk. But also, in some places, we just know that there's a gap there, and we need to talk to the relevant stakeholders to see if there's a way to fill in that gap. So this just visually shows those feature developers that are the core users of the Chrome status tool, but then the expanding orbit of other stakeholders that provide or consume that information, including cross-functional approvers who play a role in launching the feature, key partners at big websites that use features in the web platform, web developers, which are smaller websites, but there's a lot of them, and we really want to encourage the success of both groups. Tech writers that help move that technical documentation out to a form that's consumable by a broader audience, and of course, inside Google, all of our product managers, business developers, dev relations folks, and product marketing managers. Now that we have that map, it'd be great to just build awesome support for every stage, for every stakeholder into the tool. But unfortunately, that with limited resources, we can't just build everything. So we need a strategy for 2021. And the strategy that we're choosing is a breadth-first approach, where we do a little bit throughout the whole life cycle to get all those relevant stakeholders engaged and participating with the site more often. And I'll show you some of those features we have in mind on the following slides. Then after we get that, then we'll just iteratively continue to deepen the feature support all through the lifecycle based on feedback from stakeholders. So here's some of what we're going to be doing in 2021. We'll publish a roadmap document in our GitHub repository that will be updated, but Here, we're just outlining a list of things we have in mind, and of course the priorities and other details are subject to change. Um, but we're hoping to provide a little value add for a variety of stakeholders all across the feature lifecycle. And so these are some of the ideas we have in mind already. Um, First of all, we'd like to have API owners do their LGTMs in the tool rather than on the mailing list. Rather than try to detect what they're doing on the mailing list and bring it into the tool, we really want the tool to be that hub, like center of activity for feature tracking. And then that information would be sent out to the mailing list as a notification, and discussion can happen there, but the actual tracking would happen directly in the tool as the primary owner of that information. The feature list that occurs on is offered on the site now, it has a chronological list of features with a fairly fixed display, but that just doesn't satisfy the variety of use cases that we're expecting. So we want it to be more configurable by users, so that you could do more different kinds of search and bring up the columns for the information that's relevant to your job, for instance. And one of the query terms we'd like to have is a my features query that shows you the set of features that you're involved with, so that if you need to check back on those to make sure that it's progressing, or to update something that you've been asked to update, you have an easy way to access the complete set of features that you need to work on. That current feature list is a chronological list of things that happened in the past. We want to emphasize another view that is looking forward and laying things out on a timeline with actual estimated dates, so that partners can know when to expect a certain feature to be broadly available, so that they can coordinate that with their own plans. And when those partners give us feedback, we want to know, like, who is this feedback coming from and how should it be prioritized. Part of that, understanding that, is understanding the roles people play in their org and which org they're a part of. With a better understanding of who the users are, we could put their feedback in context that would allow us to better advocate on behalf of the community. We have an idea for a feature we've been calling endorsements, which is a combination of upvoting and commenting, but the details are still to be decided. The metrics on the site exist in a list, and the features are in a list, but those two lists do not relate to each other. A developer knows which metrics are relevant to their feature, but a person coming to the site to research a feature would not be able to make that mapping. So we'll try to represent that in the tool and surface it in the UI. Notifications on the site currently are generic diffs. When a user stars a feature, any change to that feature will generate a diff email. So we'll continue that, but we'll also explore options to offer subscriptions that could allow a user to get notifications that are relevant to their tasks. For example, a tech writer who is interested in the documentation links might be able to subscribe to all documentation links of all features on the site and be notified of only those types of changes. The lack of a change might also be an important signal. We expect features to progress through their life cycle. If too much time goes by, then we might send a reminder to the users who were involved in authoring a feature entry to go back and update it. Behind the scenes, we have a lot of infrastructure work, including technical debt, finishing the Python 3 upgrade, improving testing, and other infrastructure work. Well, 2021 will be a very busy year for our team, and for me in particular, to implement everything that we've been outlining here. But here's some things that you can do to help. First of all, if you are a feature owner and you have existing feature entries, please update those entries. Now that our process is more well defined and laid out in the tool, it's more obvious which fields are missing and should be expected for a feature at a certain stage. Also, over the coming year, we expect there to be more opportunities for users to engage with Chrome status. So just set the expectation that you'll be coming back to use Chrome status more often. And if you do find any bugs or awkward details of the user interface, please leave us a bug report or user feedback in our GitHub issues. That about wraps it up for the recorded part of this presentation. Now I'll be happy to take your questions.
Questions in the Slack. So let me answer those first. the first question was, where's the standards related stakeholders and the list of stakeholders? Well, you know what? They probably should have been in the list, actually, because the feature developers participate in that, and the the processes, the launch process includes steps to work through incubation. But I would say there's probably opportunity to do more there. If there is um, a specific role that we needed, like a sign off or another field to track something and what's going on in the standards body, we can certainly handle that request. So that would be something to put in our GitHub issues. Also, now that we have an explicit representation of what the launch process is, we can have variants of it. So if there's different processes that are applicable to, depending on which standards body your feature is working through, there's room to have variants if we need that. So the next question is basically saying that they give endorsements. I like the idea too. The idea is pretty vague right now. So just inspiration for that, you might think of like reviews on review sites, something like that where people can leave a comment and it's not reviewing the feature that because it might not be ready for them to use yet. If it is, they could review it and get the experience with it. But they might also express what their intent to what their need is for that, and so then that would be available to help guide the development of that feature. Now, of course, that can happen through mailing lists already or through other tools. We have many ways to communicate, but it's often disorganized. And so a feature like this would try to do it in a lightweight, flexible way that would centralize the information and make it more consumable, better for decision making. And then we have another question, which is, how does launch review work? Is that implemented now? We do have launch review issues that are tracked through Monorail. That does happen now, and that's not part of the Chrome status tool other than just linking out to that existing issue. So there is a process for that. It's a sign-off process, a cross-functional sign-off process. That's what we have in the Slack. If anybody wants to raise their hand, I can call on you with any additional questions, or if you could just put it in the Slack, that's fine. What's the best way to do queries over this database today? There's really no query language. That's actually part of the problem with its existing implementation, is that it's just hard-coded queries that have certain hard-coded lists of the features in a fairly chronological order, and then in the user interface that you see now, there's some filtering that happens on the client side. There's a search box at the top of the UI, and there's actually a little help icon there. So it has a few query terms, but the power there is not very clear. It's not very powerful, and it's also not very clear. The syntax there is actually related to the JSON format of the feed. So it takes some guesswork. It's not obvious what's available. So we'll be redoing that as part of the list page redesign. I think we'll reconsider the whole query language and try to make that more obvious to users. The underlying database is the App Engine data store. So it uses the GQL thing. So we don't normally do a lot of queries over it other than what's presented in the UI there. What do you imagine looking forward versus things looking
One note on that. We can, or if people are interested in poking at this data, there's a JSON endpoint on the site that does give you all the data. You can go to town if you want to do something short term before there's more power in the UI.
Yeah, that one thing I might add though, the JSON feed that we currently have, In terms of building out anything on top of that, that may change in the future. I think we probably do not want to be sending down a JSON blob. But for the time being, if you need something more powerful than the current query language permits, that certainly would be a way to approach it, at least for the time being.
I would put that even stronger, that it will change.
Yes, it will change.
So what is the looking forward versus looking back? And what's shipping in all three browsers, or what? So what's the past versus the future in a complex ecosystem, or what is now in the timeline? That's a good question, actually. That'll have to be part of the design for the roadmap view. Part of our roadmap for this tool is to do the design on that. Right now, this is a fairly we're just giving you an outline of what we have in mind, but we don't have the details worked out. So one way that this might work would be calendar oriented, and so the now, in terms of like what shipping would be, since it's date oriented, now would be today's date, and so there would be a representation of feature support based in different user agents on the timeline. So you would see if a feature has support in Chrome versus other user agents. But we'll have to see how that goes. And that's the end of my time, actually. I just want to quickly note that Chris Wilson is going to be giving another talk in room 2 in the next session at 11:20. And that is going to be covering the launch process. So thank you all, and have a great rest of BlinkOn.